Between 2013 and 2016, the Philadelphia 76ers were historically bad, so bad that during that time period they set new NBA records for the longest losing streaks in season losing streaks, in which they lost 26 games in the 2013-14 season, a year in which they finished with just 19 wins on the season, and also set the longest losing streak in NBA history by any franchise over a span of 2 seasons, in which they lost 28 straight games, going from the end of the 2014-15 season and starting into the 2015-16 year. That year, in 2015-16, they would also set the record for the worst finish in NBA history with a record of 10-72. But while the Sixers were so bad during that time period, the front office at that time maintained that this was all part of the plan, trusting the process, as they called it, to remain so bad that would enable them to land top lottery picks year after year and build a contender through the draft. And while you can debate whether or not that has worked out for the Sixers, who have been able to be title contenders for the past 5 or 6 seasons and getting a franchise player through the draft in Joel Embiid, but at the same time have never been able to get past the second round of the playoffs. The fact of the matter is, the Sixers had a plan. They wanted to be bad, very bad, and hopefully stacking up some of the best prospects coming into the league and building a contending team. But we're not here to talk about the Sixers and how they managed to be one of the worst teams in NBA history. We're here to talk about a team that is rivaling that of the Sixers to be crowned the worst team in NBA history, but why, unlike the Philadelphia 76ers, their situation is much worse, and the biggest issue for why they have been so bad. And yes, we're talking about the Detroit Pistons, who have been comically bad to start this season, with no end in sight for them to even be able to win a measly game as a professional basketball team. As always, if you're new to the channel and you like this type of content, it would mean a great deal to me if you subscribe to help the channel grow. We are nearing 25,000 subscribers. Let's see if we can reach that mark by the end of the year, and in return I'll be providing more NBA content like this. Now, when the Detroit Pistons landed the #1 pick in the 2021 draft lottery, a year in which it was for the most part consensus that the #1 selection was going to be Cade Cunningham, a future generational talent, the thought was this was finally going to turn the Pistons' fortune around, a team that had only been to the playoffs twice since 2009, hadn't won a playoff series since 2008, and a team that was embracing the tank, winning just 20 games in back-to-back seasons, but somehow couldn't seem to get lucky in the draft lottery before. They would fall to number 7 in the prior draft and selected Killian Hayes, getting the #1 pick in a draft that was projected to have a generational talent. This was the starting point to get them trending in the right direction. But then Cunningham would suffer injuries here and there in his rookie season and would miss virtually all of his sophomore year, but even then, it wasn't as much of a problem because the Pistons weren't suddenly going to be title contenders with Cade. They still needed to keep losing and building through the draft. And the Pistons, to their credit, they made some solid decisions on draft night in 2022. First, they selected Jaden Ivey, who I thought was a steal of a selection, to get him at number 5. They traded up in the draft to get Jalen Duren in the lottery. That season, the Pistons, they did what they needed to do, and being really bad again and tanking for Wembanyama, finishing with the worst record in the NBA and having the best odds to land Wemby. Until luck wasn't on their side yet again, despite finishing with the worst record and having the best odds to land in the top 4 than any other team. Every team jumped them, leaving them with the number 5 pick, which was the lowest pick they could have fallen to for having the worst record in the league. Here's the thing though, and I'm not here to talk about their selection number 5 because I actually think Osur Thompson at 5 was a great pick for them. And even though he's been a little inconsistent, I still think he has huge upside, even more than his brother who went number 4. I even would go as far as to say he has more upside than Brandon Miller. But look, none of that matters because the Pistons, going into this season, they were not supposed to be this bad. Like, no one thought they were going to be making the playoffs. No one thought they were going to be a 500 or above level team. But as they're currently constructed, the amount of young talent they have on their roster, combined with balanced shooting from veterans like Joe Harris and Bojan Bogdanovic, you thought, okay, this is going to be one of those young, fast, scrappy teams that you have to come ready to play or they're going to get the best of you. An inexperienced team that would have a hard time closing out games, but a young, competitive, fighting team nonetheless, a team that was going to be up and coming and maybe be in the running for that last play-in spot. And if you think I'm BSing or that I'm crazy, because you're probably saying no one actually thought that going into this season, it's easy to say that now based on what we've seen from the Pistons thus far, but just go back and look at some of the preseason rankings from the major media outlets from mid-October. A lot of pundits had the Pistons finishing anywhere between 14 and 11 in the East. The reason I remember this is because some had the Pistons ahead of the Chicago Bulls in their preseason power rankings, which I will never forget. So no one thought the Pistons were going to be good, but no one thought they were going to be this bad, and they shouldn't be this bad. And yes, I know they've had some injuries. Jalen Duren has missed a lot of time, which I've maintained is one of their more underrated players. Bogdanovic missed a fair amount of time to start the season, but their core guys, their best players, most notably Cade Cunningham, is finally healthy. For a team that is supposed to have a bunch of young studs, they should not be dead last in the NBA, and a team that is more than likely going to be setting the record for the longest losing streak in NBA history. So what's the problem here? Why are the Pistons this bad? At the end of the day, this is still a team, a professional basketball team with professional basketball players, and while you're always going to have good and bad teams in every NBA season, the way the NBA is today, and the level of parity you see across the league, any team can beat anybody on a given night, for the most part. You can't go through your schedule and automatically pencil any game in as a win, except if you've got the Pistons coming up. And I think right now, with the Pistons sitting on a 23-game losing streak at the time of this recording, people are trying to pinpoint what is it exactly for why this team can't win a game. And yes, you can try to tackle it by going through the numbers, advanced stats, what have you. They have the worst net rating in the NBA. They're bad on offense and defense, bottom 5 in the league in both. They're terrible when it comes to three-point shooting in a league that is predicated on three-point shooting. They turn the ball over at a very high rate, the second worst in the league. They're so bad on defense that they can't guard their man effectively without fouling them. They lead the league in fouls committed, and by a wide margin at that. They also don't get to the foul line enough themselves. They can't finish at the rim efficiently. They don't rebound the ball well despite their size. Like, yes, all of that is a problem and explains why they are bad, but even with those numbers, you would at least expect some wins to happen here and there every so often, because here's the thing, the Pistons aren't just losing games in this 23-game losing streak. They're not even competitive in their losses. The age-old saying, you can lose, but are you losing as a team? Are you still giving maximum effort in a loss? Are the losses moral victories? I hate that phrase, but it is true sometimes. You can lose, but if you're still getting progress out of a loss or learning from said losses, then that, in a way, can be considered a win. The Pistons in their last 2 losses alone have lost by more than 30 points, and the games were more or less decided and over by halftime. In this entire losing streak, they've only had 1 loss that was by less than 5 points, which shockingly was against the Denver Nuggets. Most of the losses in this losing streak have been by double digits. Like, really, you can't sit here and say that even when the Pistons lose, that these are good losses, that their guys are still playing well, they're learning from each other and playing for each other. No, quite the opposite actually. And so when you're talking about the Pistons and their biggest issue right now, their biggest problem and why they are so bad and why it's been so hard for them to win a basketball game, it's not any particular player or players. It's not the coaching staff. It's not even the front office who has constructed this roster. It's not even just the way they go out there and play the game. It's that these guys are so defeated, so dejected by just how bad they have played, how embarrassing it is to be losing in the manner that they have been. They can't get over the mental hurdle of a perpetual state of losing, because even when the Pistons go on a little bit of a run in a game, even when it looks like, hey, they finally might win this one, if a team starts countering with a run of their own, you can see the look in the players' eyes, their body language, their demeanor, and the way they carry themselves like, here we go again, and then they just crumble. You can call it mentally soft, not having a killer instinct, but it's a young team that doesn't have a history of winning, doesn't know what it takes to win consistently in the NBA, and it's gotten to the point where the guys, they know the season is already over, they know everyone is talking about how comically bad they've been, that this team has checked out on each other. The coaching staff has lost the locker room, and their guys are no longer playing for each other, but more focused on themselves, their own numbers, and how it's going to impact their next contract, and probably thinking, man, how do I even get off this team so I can finally remember what it feels like to start winning again? Getting out of a mental rut, a losing mentality, especially when it's on this scale, is the hardest thing to do in the game of basketball, and it's the biggest problem facing the Pistons right now, more so than any given metric, player, offensive system, or coach. But I would love to hear what you guys think. Let me know in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.